The history of heavy.
We are finally doing this, and this is happening. And what is happening is episode 50, Dave. It is the History of Heavy podcast. Big Daddy Dave Lieberman, Michael Huntsman. 50 episodes, Dave. What the hell, man?
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. This podcast is almost as old as you and
I. Yeah, we should be as young as this podcast, but it will catch us soon enough. Of that, I am sure.
That's for sure. Just the technical difficulties are aging me rapidly.
Yeah, we're having a bunch of weirdness. We were having scheduling conflicts that is almost entirely on my part that is having us miss some weeks. We have technical difficulties almost entirely on your part that is 100%. Causing some challenges. There's a little bit of weirdness with the video. There's a little bit of weirdness with the audio. We're only 50 episodes in, people. We're working out the kinks. But tonight's a big one for a whole bunch of reasons, man. How you feeling?
I'm feeling good. This is going to be a fun episode, and I hope our listeners enjoy it as much as I enjoyed putting it together.
Yeah, I think it will be a fun one. We remain, I'm trying to keep up, right? We remain in 1974.
Very good.
Last time we talked about a little krautrock and Faust, which was a very, very fun conversation and a bit of, it's not atypical for us to veer off of the typical beaten path of quote unquote heavy, but krautrock certainly was us wandering a bit astray of capital H heavy. This week, we are back firmly in its grasp, and we will get into all of that, but not until we talk a little bit more about 1974 via Dave's Cultural Corner. Dave's Cultural!
So as we do in the Cultural Corner, we take a loose interpretation of what that means. And we often try to set the stage by talking a little bit about what else was going on in the time. A lot of times I'll give a little brief history of the year to tell you what's going on. We did a little bit of that before for 1974. KISS exists as a subculture all in themselves. So tonight's Cultural Corner will be exploring the subculture of KISS. Not a band history, but a cultural overview of what is the culture of KISS. And it really boils down to two main pillars, two main elements: KISS Army and KISS merch. So without further ado, I do want to dive in and tell you a little bit about each. We'll start with the KISS Army. The KISS Army is the official fan club for the American rock band KISS, as well as the unofficial name used to refer to KISS fans in general. It was started unofficially in 1975 by Bill Starkey and Jay Evans. The membership form displayed for the first time what became known as the official KISS Army logo, which was designed by Howard Marks Incorporated, the advertising agency working with KISS at the time. Order forms for the KISS Army first appeared with this new official logo in 1976's Destroyer. Former head of KISS merchandising, Ron Boutwell, estimated that the fan club at its peak earned $5,000 per day and had nearly 100,000 members. The Army is its own cultural phenomenon. In celebration of the KISS Army's 35th anniversary, November 21st, 2010 was declared KISS Army Day in Terre Haute. Starkey served as a guest DJ for local rock radio station WWVR on that day. So the Kiss Army. Don't go to battle with the Kiss Army. One of the classic blunders. Um, let's talk about merch. Kiss has licensed a large amount of merchandising throughout their career. According to Sandra O'Loughlin in an article for Brand Week magazine, Kiss has licensed its name to more than 3,000 product categories, from lunchboxes and comic books to credit cards and condoms, to become nearly a $1 billion brand. Kiss has more pieces of merchandise and have generated more money from merchandise than any other artist in the history of music. And I think probably by a long shot. Bassist and co founder Gene Simmons, who has been the most aggressive and ambitious member of the band in seeking merchandising deals, has voiced disregard for the portions of his fan base who disapprove of such merchandising. In his book, Sex Money Kiss, he states, "I think it's cool to see my face on a lunchbox. It's fun. I'm doing this for me. You don't have to buy one," which sounds exactly like Gene Simmons. So let's talk about some of this merch. This is not an exhaustive list. I'm just going to hit some high points. Comic books. In 1977, Marvel Comics published a magazine format full-color comic book presenting the band as superheroes. Very famously, blood from each band member was drawn by a registered nurse, witnessed by a notary public, and poured into the vats of red ink used for printing the comic at Marvel's Borden ink plant in Depew, New York. Todd McFarlane, who's a very famous comic artist, he has a title called Kiss Psycho Circus. X-Men writer Joe Casey had one which lasted for 13 issues and ended production as recently as 2004, which is actually a long time ago now, but it's got 2000 in it, so it feels recent to me. 2007, it was announced that the Kiss Comic Group, a joint venture between Platinum Studios and the band, would launch a new comic, Kiss 4K, which ran for 6 issues and one special edition issue in 2008. In 2011, Kiss teamed up with popular comic series Archie for a 4-part series, Archie Meets Kiss. In 2012, IDW Publishing signed a deal with the Kiss Comic Group to have begun printing a new Kiss comic. Let's talk about action figures. In 1978, the superhero toy company Mego released a line of action figures of each band member. 2 variants of the series exist. The first series was released with the stock standard, quote unquote, skinny bodies, while the second series was produced with muscular, more superhero like physiques. Starting in 97 and continuing to the present day, McFarlane Toys has manufactured several different series of action figures and figurines, ranging from the exaggeratedly demonic Kiss Psycho Circus series of figures to the more realistic and representative Alive series depicting the band performing in their 1975 costumes. In the 1990s, a set of 4 Zippo lighters was released, each featuring a cover image from the band's 1978 solo albums. From 2001 to 2006, Kiss offered for sale a custom-made coffin, Kiss Coffin with K, everything is K with Kiss, so Kiss Coffin with a K, emblazoned with imagery of the band for $4,500. On the Howard Stern radio show, Gene Simmons said of the casket, "This is the ultimate Kiss collectible. I love living, but this makes the alternative look pretty damn good." Notable people to be buried in a Kiss casket include Pantera guitarist Dimebag Darrell and drummer Vinnie Paul. In 2002, a line of Kiss condoms entitled Kiss Condoms with a K entered the market in varieties such as Love Gun Protection, Tongue Lubricated, and Studded Paul. In February 2006, the band licensed a new product line of beauty shampoo and fragrance products entitled Kiss Him for men and Kiss Her for women. It includes cologne, shampoo, body wash, deodorant, body spray, shaving cream, perfume, body lotion, shower gel, and bath splash. First USA Bank offers a Kiss Platinum Visa card. In 1978, the first Kiss arcade pinball machine was introduced by Bally and stayed in circulation well into the 80s. Maybe you have an anecdote about a Kiss pinball machine. No spoilers there. Maybe a spoiler. The Kiss on Tour board game was offered in stores in 78. In 2003, a Kiss themed variation of Monopoly was released as Kissopoly, very creative. Kiss Psycho Circus The Nightmare Child was released for PC and Dreamcast in 2000, while Kiss Pinball for the PC and PlayStation was released in 2000 and 2001, respectively. There are Kiss trading cards. The Kiss AM transistor radio, which was released in 1977, has become one of the most sought after and collectible items of Kiss merchandising. Released by Tiger in 1978, the Kiss record player could only play 7-inch singles and was originally sold for around $16. It's embellished with the solo photos from the cover of Alive 2. Along with the transistor radio, it's become one of the most sought after items for Kiss collectors. There was a toy guitar. There were two versions of the Kiss guitar, one packaged by itself from 1977 and one packaged with the Kiss microphone and amp from 1978. And did you know that there is the Kiss Coffee House with a K, a specialty coffee retailer operating in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, with other outlets in the planning stages? The diner sells Kiss brand coffee, food, thermoses, mugs, and other products. Ladies and gentlemen, Kiss is its own culture.
Very well done, Dave. Yes, Kiss is in fact its own culture, and you've spanned many years and decades in your cultural corner this week, which is exciting because it just means that there will be increased opportunity to continue to talk about Kiss as we move throughout our chronology of heavy. As we have prior to this episode, I think we have probably talked about Kiss more than any other band save Black Sabbath. Just by referencing them and telling stories. Ace Frehley obviously died earlier or late last year, so we had a few occasions, sadly, to talk about Ace. But Kiss is a force that looms large on this podcast, and we'll get into a little more about that right now. For those of you that don't know, in addition to being a billion-dollar merchandising industry, Kiss was also a rock and roll band. They also wrote some songs and played some music.
Wow.
Yeah, not a lot of people realize this, but it's true. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that leading up to tonight's conversation. This is not an exhaustive history of Kiss's recorded material or how they were formed or any of that stuff. That's easy enough to find. I'm just going to get some brief highlights to get us up to tonight's topic. Kiss, the rock and roll band, released their self-titled debut album on February 8th, 1974. That's right, 1974, the year we are talking about tonight. We're not talking about Kiss, though. We're not talking about the debut album Kiss, because a mere 6 months later, after that record was released, they flew to Los Angeles from their native New York to record that record's follow-up. As with the first album, they again worked with producers Ken Kerner and Richie Wise, and were working originally under the working title The Harder They Come. That title didn't last, though, perhaps in part due to the success 2 years prior of the classic crime film and its very famous Jimmy Cliff reggae score, that the band decided to change the name of the record, and they settled on the title Hotter Than Hell, after a song that Paul Stanley had written for the album. That album was also released in 1974, unless at the end of this episode, Dave tells me that I have the date wrong, which is altogether possible. But if I have this right, Hotter Than Hell was released on October 22nd, 1974, just about 12 days after my 6th birthday. It was released on Casablanca Records, along with the album's lone single, Let Me Go Rock and Roll. The album underperformed compared to the first record. Hotter Than Hell peaked at number 100 on the Billboard charts, and Hotter Than Hell would take 5 years to go gold, not going gold until almost 1977. Despite the album's relative lack of commercial success, many of the songs on the record became fan favorites and live staples, including Parasite, Got to Choose, the title track, and the topic of tonight's conversation, Watchin' You. But before we get into that Gene Simmons penned ditty, I want to turn the conversation a little bit because as I mentioned at the top, we have talked a lot about Kiss kind of ad hoc out as we've talked about other bands throughout our conversations, our 49 previous conversations. And inevitably, those conversations will turn to me talking about my adolescence, my love for Kiss, me discovering Kiss, Kiss Alive being the first record I ever bought, blah, 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 blah. What we don't ever talk about, Dave, is your relationship to Kiss. And I want to tee this up by saying that, we are, what are we? We're like
But
five
5
or
years.
6 years. Yeah, 5 or 6 years. I'm 5 or 6 years older than you. And for so not really a generation apart, but I think in musical terms, it's kind of a generation apart.
I think that the big key here is that your sisters expand your generation, your musical age, right? Because they were older and they brought you into a lot more music earlier. So that you have a broader, older musical age.
Definitely true. Specific as it relates to Kiss, though, and this is where I'm curious about your relationship with the band, is for me, let's just for my generation, let's say I'm not talking to you, I'm just talking broadly about my generation. Kiss is a cornerstone, monumentally important band. um my experience, and again, I don't want to make this about me, I want to make it about you, but I'll leave it at this. My experience growing up was you were either a Zeppelin guy or you were a Kiss guy, and I was decidedly a Kiss guy. So again, a little bit of distance in our age, but talk a little bit about what your young exposure to Kiss was and kind of how you related to the band, if at all, at a young age.
So this is going to be kind of funny because um, my young connection with Kiss is almost not present. I Everybody always knew of Kiss. Kiss, the merchandising juggernaut, was inescapable. So I saw Kiss lunchboxes, Kiss big wheels, Kiss stuff was always in my view, but I never consumed Kiss directly. I did not know Kiss. I didn't have a personal relationship. I was born in 73. Their first record comes out 74. That's when their path starts. They don't go, gold for 5 years. So like by the time I'm 5, 6 years old, they're really kind of getting their wings under them, if you will. Um, so I don't have a personal connection to Kiss in my youth. My personal connection to Kiss is aligned with my personal connection with you. so, so we're not trying to make this about you, but we've come full circle back to you. Um, my my summer between high school and college, I worked at a camp in the Santa Cruz Mountains. I was in the kitchen, and I discovered Black Sabbath. I was turned on to Black Sabbath, and that was a quantum moment for me, as is obvious. We don't need to go into. Um, but a friend of mine there in that experienced that moment with me was a huge Kiss fan. So I started to dabble with Kiss. I was Kiss curious the summer before I met you, and then I met you, and that's when the floodgate opened, and so that's when I started listening to Kiss. And again with my CD club, my very sophisticated grift with the CD club, I got, I want to say I got Kiss Alive too, and that I consumed heavily. I found that it was fun, pop, a little bit more poppy, but very heavy. And so it was fun because it was easy to connect to because it had a very approachable format and song structure and chord progression, but it had a heaviness that was no doubt. And then it seemed like all the songs were about rock and roll, partying, or having sex with underage girls.
We'll get to that in just a second. In fact,
Mm.
um, it's I've never really thought. That's again why I love doing this podcast and exploring this stuff
It's
because I've
almost
never
like we don't
really.
know each other, right?
Yeah, well, and understanding this stuff in a context where I have to explain it because I always think of Kiss as being sort of this important band of my child. Well, let me frame it as a question to you. When do you say, not specific to us, but broadly speaking, what age do you think generally people start to define their music? Like, is that
That's
a teenager? Is that a young 20 something? Like, what is typically somebody's generational music?
I think that it's typically somebody's. I'm going to qualify this in a second, but typically or broadly, I think it's in that preteen to teen zone. But I think that that is affected by siblings. So there was a Mormon family that lived down the street from me when I was growing up, and we spent a lot of time there because there was always somebody home. So that was a safe place we could just go to when my parents couldn't be home. This is the '70s; things are cash. We don't have cell phones. We don't have any GPS. It's very analog. But they were into like Styx, Loverboy, um,
So early 80s.
kind of late '70s, early '80s stuff. Is when I turned on. I became awake. My very first music was for my 10th birthday, and I got 2 cassette tapes: The Cars, Heartbeat City, and Twisted Sister, Stay Hungry. Uh, Excellent records, both of
Both
them,
great. Both great. Yeah.
and very contemporaneous. But like that was my entry into musical awakeness. I became awake. My dad always listened to the Beatles, so I had a knowledge of the Beatles before, and some other bands. I remember doing a report on Roberta Flack the first time ever I saw Your Face when I was in 5th grade because he had the record, and there were some others, but it was it was really very binary. It was the Beatles, and it was other. And the thing that did it for me was that in probably '82, my neighborhood got cable before anybody else in my friend group, and so we had MTV, and so that exploded my musical context. I suddenly had access to more stuff, and back in those days, it was literally concert footage. That was like most of what MTV was. And it was early '80s, so there was a lot of glam rock. There was like I remember Scorpions were big, Billy Idol, of course Michael Jackson and some other pop stuff, but
Def Leppard.
Def Leppard huge. So those were the things I was consuming, and because it was in front of me, and because I was an age where you're really receptive to music, um, I that's what I was into. I definitely veered towards the Billy Idol, Scorpions, Twisted Sister thing more. But I had an appreciation for the Cars enough to like want that for my birthday. Um, so Kiss wasn't on MTV, and they got sort of swept away in this media onslaught of what was on MTV for me. Now that's not true for everybody, but to go take it back to your question, when do people become kind of aware, or become musically on? I think it's that early kind of 11, 12, 10, 11, 12, you become sort of aware and are developing your own tastes. But then in those early teenage years, it seems like that's when you're defined by your music. And I feel like the Led Zeppelin t-shirt and the Jimi Hendrix t-shirt is a developmental stage for boys, at least. Like,
Yep.
it's not classic rock, it's adolescent boy. and it will be like that for all of time. It seems time immemorial, because that's what it's a musical evolution that aligns with adolescence. Music was in its adolescence in those bands. It was on display in those bands. You're breaking out. They were changing music and being exposed to different influences, and that teenage, and we've talked about this a number of times on our podcast, how the teenage demographic had evolved from the 50s into a real defined category by now, or by the 60s and 70s when these other albums and these other bands are coming out. So like all these things, is a confluence of events. And so I think that at this stage of the game, I don't know about before maybe the 50s or 60s, but ever since, I really feel like it's that tween, that 10 to 12 is when you're getting revved up, and then by 13, man, you're defined. You know who you are and what you want, and you just dig deeper and deeper.
Yeah, it's interesting. And as much as I have thought about this, and I've thought about it a lot, and you talked about my sisters, I've never thought about it in this way in my whole life. And you've just kind of given me this aha moment, which is kind of interesting. Aha was on MTV a lot as well.
That's true.
The Kiss's sort of hate, their biggest moment, arguably, and they've had a lot of big moments, was kind of 76, 77. That would have been Destroyer and Love Gun. They had massive success with Alive, the first live record. So I would have been 8 or 9 right around then. And I think you're right. I think the sort of the core Kiss fans at that point, at their height, were probably like 15, 16, 17-year-old boys. And I'd always thought of my sisters as their influence on me was giving me their music. But in giving me their music, they probably ignited my interest in music
Yes.
earlier. And I'm just saying,
Yes.
back to you what you just said, earlier than a lot of people, because my sisters were so much older, 12 and 13 years older than I am. So that's probably exactly right, because by the time I saw Kiss, which would have been in 1979 for Dynasty, they were well past their prime. And, I'm still a little kid.
Yeah.
And that, again, as we've talked about on this podcast a lot, while I had a bunch of other music that I loved at that point, Kiss was a whole nother world, in large part because of all the things you talked about in the cultural corner that had nothing to do with the music. That, I loved Aerosmith and Cheap Trick too. And, in hindsight, those records that Aerosmith and Cheap Trick made in the 70s are significantly better than the records Kiss made at the same time. But in terms of my relationship to the band, it wasn't even close.
No.
I mean,
Kiss I think what's a better analog for me than Kiss is the Misfits. I love the Misfits. And I don't think you can make an argument that the Misfits are good. They're just awesome.
Man, I don't know. I mean, we'll have an episode. We'll have a Misfits episode in like 60 episodes. Yeah. But
well, let me put it differently then. You can make the argument that they're good, but I make the argument that they're awesome. Like I love them. And
I don't know. Walk Among Us is fucking good. I don't care if they're wearing makeup or not.
Okay, well, I just thought it was that I liked them a lot, but you're right, they're good.
I mean, I think your point is
you're good, but my point is that they have a persona, they have a gimmick, they have a.
You don't have to like the music to like them.
There you go. That's what I'm trying to. That's what I'm trying to get to. Is it's as much not the music as the music, and it can almost stand alone without the music. You can still like the Misfits without even really knowing or liking the music. Uh,
It honestly, when it on by the time I had been exposed to Kiss visually, it I it would not have mattered at all what they would have sounded like. I would have loved them regardless. They could have sounded like Black Sabbath, or they could have sounded like ABBA, and
right,
I would have loved them. I already decided they were the
right,
greatest thing that ever happened.
right, right. And that is unique, I think, and special. They were their own culture. They were a juggernaut. They were a vortex, an orbit, all their own, and they created this whole thing. And I think part of that is, I mean, it's not insignificant that Gene Simmons is such an egotist. That matters when it
They
comes.
willed themselves to success. Like they
Totally
were going to be famous no matter what.
correct, and it really matters, especially in a fickle thing like something called show business. Right? They were showmen. They were putting on a show, and in a masterful sort of way. But you have to believe that what you have to offer is good, better than other things, and gives you a credibility that is outsized. You have to believe in all of those things and accept all of those things as a point of departure in order to gain what they gained.
Right. I don't, yes, I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole because I do want to focus on the
We do have a
music.
song to talk about. Yeah.
But the I think a really good analog for Gene Simmons, which I have never considered until just now, is Lars Ulrich.
Oh
Is
my
that
God.
is
Yeah.
that he was going to be successful and Metallica was going to make it solely on Lars's will, just like Gene Simmons. Each of those guys had superior musicians, talented songwriters in their bands,
Yep.
but neither Paul Stanley nor James Hetfield may not have been successful without Gene or Lars, but Gene and Lars would have been successful no matter what.
That's right. That's a really, really good analog. That's a very good analogy.
Okay, let's set all of that stuff aside for a second and let's go back to your early impressions of Kiss and let's take away all the artifice and all the noise. What before you heard them from your friend at camp and from me in a meaningful way, what was your impression of their music? I mean, you obviously knew Rock and Roll All Night, but like, did you what did you think they sounded like?
Yeah, they had a um, kind of a hard rock. I felt like they were kind of hard rock.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is can be true. At least
Yeah.
a part of their discography fits neatly into that bucket. But I think other songs fit neatly into other buckets, and when you put it all together, it's a little more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know much of their discography. I knew Rock and Roll All Night, Party Every Day, but I didn't really. It wasn't a song I connected with. It wasn't in my sphere of influence
Mm-hmm.
because the stuff that dominated the waves of my attention was the stuff I mentioned, the MTV stuff, and it just this was also a little bit past Kiss's prime. In fact, I do remember Kiss being on MTV. Um,
After they took off the makeup.
yes, and it was that song,
Look it up. Heaven's on Fire.
"Heaven's on Fire." It was that, and it was hard for me to understand that this was Kiss, that band that looked a certain way. But I liked that song, and I liked that Gene Simmons' bass was a battle axe, like it was literally an axe.
Yeah.
Um, so that was actually, I forgot about that, but that song was really my first like organic contact with
Mm-hmm.
Kiss, and I liked it. But again, I was at an age and in a place in my life where I could not purchase music, so I had to consume what was available for free, and it was MTV and what the two cassettes I had when I was 10.
Right. So you get to camp, you
Yeah.
start to hear the old kind of classic Kiss stuff. You meet me, you start to hear the old classic Kiss stuff. Do you remember what your take on it was then?
it was awesome. I was like, dude, where has this been all my life? What have I've been sleeping on it? Just like with Sabbath. Like I had seen a Black Sabbath album in people's collection. I was like, whoa, I don't know about that. And then I consumed it and it altered my perception. It was like taking audio acid. It was there's a before and then there's an after. And you
Mhm.
can't think about the world in any other way because your mind, my musical mind was open in a way that it could not perceive before. I perceived music in a different way, in a bigger way than I could before.
That is such a I have it all of the time where you've heard about a band for many many years and for whatever reason you don't get to them or you discard them or whatever, and then you hear them and you go, oh, that's what that band sounds like.
Right,
It
right.
happened to me 3 days ago. Do you know the punk band, the Milwaukee punk band, Die Kreutzen?
Oh, I've heard of them.
Yeah. So Die Kreutzen was an early 80s, kind of early Black Flag adjacent kind of hardcore band.
Okay.
And I've heard of them my whole life and never listened to them. I finally started to dig into their catalog a few days ago and my brain exploded. I'm like, what?
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 Yeah.
This is what Die Kreutzen sounds like? These guys rule. These guys are great. So I immediately texted my buddy Patrick and going, dude, why didn't you make me listen to Die Kreutzen
Yeah.
earlier?
This
These
is
guys
your
are amazing.
fault. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not my fault.
Yeah.
But it is interesting where you know of this thing for some period, or even movies that you know any kind of art that you know that you're aware of for some period of time, and then you're actually exposed to it, and you're like, oh, that's either positive or negatively completely different than you expected it to be.
Totally. There's a show that I would see back when I had cable and there was a TV Guide channel, and I would spend most of my time actually watching that, waiting for something good to show up that nothing. And there was this show that kept being listed, Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I'm like, what is this stupid ass motherfucking thing? And so my daughter like made me sit down and watch it, and it was excellent. It was this cartoon, epic cartoon story that even has a sequel epic cartoon story, animated. I shouldn't say cartoon. It was bigger than that, but it was really entertaining and very well done. And I was like, oh wow, I slept on this for years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny how that happens. So what has your relationship been what has your relationship with Kiss been since we were in college together and me making you listen to Watching You to talk about it tonight?
So it's again the kind of Spotify algorithm relationship where
Mm-hmm.
I put on the song to listen to the song, and then it bleeds into the rest of the discography. And 2/3 of it is stuff I connect with. 1/3 of it I connect with because I remember it. 1/3 of it I connect with because it's new and I like it. And the other third is like I don't connect with. It's a little too poppy or
Mm-hmm.
ballady. They did have a big range, and that was something that was really uh, revelatory.
Revelatory.
Thanks. Uh, was just like, man, and this comes up actually frequently when I'm listening to music from an established band that has a long career. It's like, duh, they're probably good. Like they have there's a reason that they have multiple, double digits of albums. Sometimes it's just because they're, like the whole back half of the Black Sabbath discography. Tony Iommi's a professional. This is what he does when he goes to work. And some of his art is prettier than others, let's say. But he's going to work every day. And so he's producing stuff every day. And so some bands exist that way. And all bands that exist for a long time kind of have some work like that. But just the sheer range, the amount of songs that they made that that sound like Kiss, but don't sound like itself, like the
Retreads.
Ramones, right? The Ramones sound like the Ramones, and all the Ramones songs sound like Ramones songs. But Kiss sounds like Kiss without every song sounding like that the prior song. That's
Yeah, they're
hard. That
interesting.
is really hard to do.
It is, and we will talk on this show about band's longevity, how many albums a band has, during their legitimacy. I posted to our TikTok channel last week, how great early Aerosmith was versus how bad 90s Aerosmith was. And we often talk about Black Sabbath, and it's really the first six albums. Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules are great, but it's really the first six albums. And to me, with Kiss, it's the same thing. It's the first six studio albums. And the thing that Kiss did that I always loved was they made their first three albums, Kiss, Hotter Than Hell, and Dressed to Kill, and then they released Alive, which was a live compilation effectively of those first three albums. Then they made Destroyer, Love Gun, and Rock and Roll Over, and then they made Alive 2, which was a live compilation of those three albums. And to me, those six studio albums and those two live albums are the Kiss discography.
Right.
I like Creatures of the Night. Lick It Up's fine. Like, the Dynasty has some great shit on it. They did some cool stuff. But to me, those six records effectively are their discography.
Yeah. Yeah.
Since you brought up Spotify, if I told you Ozzy has 15 million monthly listeners currently on Spotify, how many would you say Kiss has?
15.
Say again.
15.
17 million.
Okay.
So they're right there, which I thought was kind of interesting. The Spotify number goes up pretty significantly as popular culture shifts its attention to something. Mm-hmm. So Ozzy, we were talking about how Sabbath got to like 31 million monthly listeners during the end of the beginning of the end. Why can't
Back to the beginning.
I don't know why I can't ever get that right. And it's like the Alice Coltrane record. It's going to haunt me forever.
Well, because they have that song, "Is This the End or the Beginning of the End?"
That's right.
So that's fair.
Right.
That's fair.
Okay, let's talk about Watchin' You. So you knew we were going to talk
44 minutes in, we're going to talk about the song.
Yeah, we'll spend 5 minutes on this and we'll wrap it up. So you knew we were going to talk about Kiss at some point. I'm guessing, a deeper album cut. I mean, the song does appear on Alive, the first live record. But I'm guessing this isn't the song you anticipated listening to. I'm not sure if you know the song at all.
No.
What'd you think?
Thought it was awesome. I love this song. Yeah, this is a great song, and I like where it lands in the album. And we talk about that kind of album architecture too. I like how it lands in the album. It's heavy. It's a little slower. This is a great song. I really like this song.
Yeah, it's got a great riff. The is great.
Yep.
One of the things, and I have, as I think a lot of Kiss fans have, a love-hate relationship with Gene Simmons. One of the things I think he is actually underrated at is being a bass player. He is a really cool bass player, and Watching You is a really good example. He gets this really kind of fuzzy, hollow tone out of his bass. And the production on these records is not great, but when his bass comes in after that opening riff, it adds this like really warm heaviness that I really dig. And what he plays isn't super complicated, but it complements the guitar part. He's not mirroring the guitar. It's got a melody of its own that's really cool.
That's I think his signature Gene Simmons. A lot of his, which is parallel, I think, to Geezer in that sense. Like he's not just keeping time or doing something aurally opposite. It's its own melody line, but it's in the bass clef. And with something that's very interesting, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to get this in at some point, was a lot of it's more on display in some other songs, but it's here too, where there's this presence of absence. He's really good at having space, and he'll do a couple of beats, and then there's the non-beat, and then he comes back on a beat. And that's really in conflict with his giant ego, right? You would think that he would Yngwie J. Malmsteen his bass, and he's actually very
Tasteful.
strategic with it and very reserved in such a way that when it shows up, it's all every note is working.
Yeah, no, really, really well said. I think that the tone of his bass, what he's playing, and then his vocal, his voice is
Yeah,
just
yeah,
so fucking awesome. Like I
yeah.
love his
He's
voice.
got a great voice.
He does, and all of Kiss's best or all of Kiss's heaviest songs are Gene songs.
Yes, yes.
Paul is even the songs, God of Thunder is a very famous heavy Gene song. Paul wrote it but gave it to
Gene
Gene.
sings it.
Like you need to sing this, dude, and that song would not have worked if Paul would have sang that
It's
song.
one of my favorite Kiss songs. That
Yeah, it
song is one of
rules.
my favorite Kiss songs.
Yeah, and a million bands, every band worth their salt in heavy music has done a Kiss cover. And, White Zombie did a very cool God of Thunder cover. Going Blind, which is one of
Oh,
the
the
best songs on
Melvins.
Hotter Than Hell. The Melvins do an incredible version of that.
That was one of the things that came up on my Spotify was their cover of Going
Oh,
Blind.
it
And
rips.
it's so good. I went back and I listened to the Kiss version and the Melvins version, and it's really difficult for me to pick one that I like better, which is great. Like normally it's very clear. Oh, I like the one I heard first the best, or I like the original the best, or I like the one from the band I like the best. But this was really hard.
Yeah, it so suits the Melvins
Yeah.
style, but it's like one of Kiss's best kind of deep cuts and heaviest tunes. But yeah, man, this is a song that I just always love. That side three specifically of Alive is there's only three songs on it because 100,000 Years has a very long Peter Criss drum solo on it. But Watching You, 100,000 Years, and Black Diamond, it's like one of my favorite sides of a Kiss record. Those three
Ugh.
songs just all rip. It's like one of Gene's best songs and one of Paul's best songs in Black Diamond, famously covered by the Replacements.
Yeah.
And that to me, when you're talking about the spectrum of Kiss, those three
Yeah.
songs pretty well define it. 100,000 Years was almost the song that I was going to bring to talk about tonight, so that's a good one to check out from the first record. But yeah, Watching You's a jam, man.
Yeah.
What else? Anything else on the song or the band or the phenomenon that is?
I think it's a good representation. It's a good core sample of what Kiss does best. So I think that if you only ever heard this Kiss song, you would understand Kiss. There's a lot more that's like it, and there's a lot more that's not like it. So if you like this song, you can find more, you can find enough to dig more into. But if you're skimming by this episode and you're like, yeah, Kiss, whatever, you listen to the song on our playlist, you've tasted Kiss.
You've tasted Kiss. Yeah, and I think if you know the big broad stuff, if you know Rock and Roll All Night, or Beth, or Lick It Up, or Hard Luck Woman, or whatever, um, you kind of squint and go, is Kiss really that heavy? It's
Right,
like, well, yeah,
right,
this is Kiss being heavy.
right, right. And this is what I associate more with Kiss. And part of
Yeah,
that
me too.
is, again, skipping over some of those ballady songs because I'm not a ballad guy. Some people are album purists. They put it on, they listen to it, they take it all, right? I'm looking at one. But I've always been a picker and a chooser. And I just don't have time or patience for certain songs by certain bands, which is one of the great things about a thing like Spotify. You can make that playlist and never cross the streams.
Yeah. Do you prefer Gene to Paul generally?
Generally, I like the Gene songs better. I can't listen to a Gene Simmons song and divorce it from the Gene Simmons personality.
Mhm.
Sometimes that works though. Like some of those songs don't work with a more
Upstanding
reasonable.
human being.
Right, right. Let's put it how it is.
Let's go to Song v Song.
Okay.
Song v Song tonight. Again, Song v Song, we pit our current favorite heavy song that we've taken from a previous episode. We pit it against the current episode's tune. So tonight, that is of course Watching You against our current champs or champ, which happens to be the same song. That would be James Brown's The Payback from episode 46. And spoiler alert, I got to take Kiss. I got to take Kiss. I would be betraying my childhood if I did not take Watching You. So Watching You will move forward to next week for me. What are you taking, Dave?
You are watching me pick Watching You as my new champion.
Oh, I did not see that coming.
It's awesome. It's a great song.
Oh man, it just warms my heart when you hear something that I have chosen, and I don't know how you're going to feel about it that you like. Although this one I felt a little more strongly about than some previous ones, but I'm glad you liked it.
This is a great one. And it allowed me to remember how much I like the Kiss that I like, and to spend some time in that world. We have so many choices and we have so many competing interests. And I've mentioned before, I listen to a lot of audiobooks. So a lot of my time in my headphones is not even music. But a lot of my free time is neither music or audiobooks or TVs. I've got a job, I've got a family, I ride a motorcycle, I've got stuff, I'm doing other things. And there was a time when music was always on in the background, where my stereo mattered and my music collection mattered. And when I was studying or when I was doing work on motorcycles with my hands, there was music playing, like that just isn't the case anymore. So I have less and less time and more competition. And the more we do this podcast, the more open my, the more competition that I get. So it was fun to spend some more time with Kiss and with this song. And I'm going to look forward to diving a little deeper.
I'm really glad to hear that. Really glad to hear that. Okay, that is it for this week. Next week, or maybe in 2 weeks, we'll have to talk about schedule in a minute. I had threatened you, Dave, that we were going to talk about the surprise new release from Neurosis that came out unexpectedly. An Undying Love for a Burning World, which is a record I immediately fell in love with, as I have with every previous Neurosis release. I am going to suggest we table that unless you feel strongly about talking about Neurosis next week. And I think we stay the course. Does that work?
I think we should stay the course. I need more time to consume more Neurosis before we talk about them.
Perfect. We will absolutely get to Neurosis. I did a very quick 1.5-minute TikTok video on the History of Heavy TikTok channel about this record last week. But I do want to stay in 1974. I think, we've got a lot of songs to get through the 70s. And I really want to talk about Foghat. So next week, we are going to be talking about Honey Hush. And if there is a more purely 70s band than Foghat, I don't know who they are. That will be next week.
Right on. I'm really looking forward to that conversation as well.
Right on, man. Always good to see you. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And as always, stay happy.
Okay, thank you. Bye.